Outside Israel's Ministry of Defense, people come to demand the return of hostages taken by Hamas. Before October the 7th, many Israelis flocked to public spaces like this to protest against their government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. One of his staunchest opponents is former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. 15 years ago, he was the Israeli leader waging a brutal war in Gaza. I've come to Tel Aviv to meet Olmert, who despite everything still has faith in a two-state solution. He believes there's no chance of that under the current Israeli leadership and with Hamas in charge of Gaza.
There is no way that there can be any stability and compromise with Hamas. Hamas doesn't want to negotiate with Israel. Hamas doesn't want to compromise with Israel. There is not any political agenda that Hamas has which can be negotiated between us and them. They want the destruction of Israel. They spell it out in the most explicit terms. And therefore, it's either us or them. So it's us, not them. That's number one. Number two, of course, we have to free all the hostages. Hopefully, there will be a deal. I think it's the paramount priority of the Israeli government. And I hope it will be done. I don't know, but when you ask me what is the end game, so this is phase one of the end game is the release of the hostages and the destruction of Hamas.
How do you do a deal with a group that you're trying to obliterate completely? A deal means give or take. When Gilad Shalit was released, you had more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, which included Yahya Sinwar. How do you do a deal while at the same time wanting to destroy Hamas?
As you know, I refuse to do the deal with Hamas, precisely because of this reason. Now, it's shaky. It's shaky. But Hamas has interests which are well known to everyone and understood by everyone. They want, number one, to release many of the prisoners that we hold in Israel, and therefore there is a basis for a deal for them, regardless of the military confrontation. And I believe that they think that they can somehow prevail in the military confrontation. It will be costly to the Palestinian people. They don't really care for the Palestinian people. They don't really care for the civilians of Gaza. If they cared for the civilians of Gaza, they may have not done what they did. But they don't. And this is for years and years and years and years. But what I want to emphasize is this. After we have completed this phase, the military confrontation and the release of hostages, Israel will have to pull out completely from Gaza. We have no interest, this is my opinion. It's not the opinion of some of the Israeli cabinet ministers I know.
Who want to reoccupy?
Some of them, yes. I think that we have to pull out completely from Gaza, back into where we started this operation, back into the international border. In order to move things forward, Israel needs to do two things. As I said, number one, to make sure that at the end of the military confrontation, we pull out, we don't want to reoccupy Gaza at all. Number two, we have to declare right now that at the end of the military confrontation, Israel is prepared to immediately embark on negotiations with the Palestinian Authority for the creation of a Palestinian state, with the complete support of the State of Israel. If we will do that, number one, I think that the international community will be more patient to allow Israel to eradicate Hamas. But number two, it will provide the necessary platform for the Arab countries and the Palestinians to, after the military operation, to cooperate on the rehabilitation of Gaza, not of entering Gaza with Arab soldiers, but helping to rehabilitate Gaza, and for the Palestinians also to start and build up a certain future for the Palestinians.
You think the Palestinian Authority can do that with 87, 88-year-old Mahmoud Abbas hasn't held an election in more than a decade? He was your partner for peace, but you think that's realistic? You think the Palestinians will accept that?
Number one, I hope so. Number two, they will have to decide who they want to represent, who they prefer to represent them. I don't know, and I don't want to offer an alternative, because the minute I will mention a name, he will be suspected of being a collaborator.
But can't we say that something underpinning all of this, with the occupation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, with the siege of Gaza, all of it created the conditions, helped create the conditions for this lack of great options of Palestinian leadership? It doesn't come out of a vacuum. October the 7th didn't come out of a vacuum. This lack of credible political alternatives didn't come out of a vacuum.
I'm known to be a very harsh critique of the Israeli government, the Prime Minister. However, nothing can clear the Palestinian leadership of their responsibility for the lack of agreement between Israel and them. Because the fact remains, and this is undisputed, that in 2008 I've presented Mahmoud Abbas with a plan that is based on the following principles. And be very attentive. Number one, a Palestinian state in borders which are comparable to 67. Number two, the Arab part of Jerusalem will be the Palestinian capital. Number three, the Holy Basin of Jerusalem, the Holy Basin including the Temple Mount, will not have any more an exclusive Israeli sovereignty. There will be a trust of 5 nations under the auspices of the United Nations Security Council, Chapter 7, which will give this body of 5 nations all the authorities to administer the old city and the most sensitive holy places, including the Temple Mount. I said, and I believe to this day, if there will be one flag, Israeli flag over the Temple Mount, there will never be peace. If there will be one flag, a Palestinian flag, there will never be peace. So there should be no flags, not Israeli, not Palestinians. It will be administered by the trust of 5 nations with a complete freedom of access to all believers. And the fourth issue is the refugees also will be negotiated within the framework of the Arab League Peace Initiative, which was initially adopted by the Arab countries in Beirut in 2002, and again was reconfirmed in Riyadh in 2007. I presented this peace plan to Mahmoud Abbas, and I have many differences with him, but to this day he confirms that this is what I presented him with. He does not deny, he does not contradict me.
It was acceptable. Certainly, he didn't get back to you with it.
He didn't get back
about
to
it.
me.
But it was still, in any deal, what you might see as generous was still unacceptable to them, no matter how much it confuses them.
What he says to this day is, had I stayed in power another 4 months, there would have been peace between us and them. He doesn't say that this was completely unacceptable. He said that we had a difference, and he shows in his hands like this. So had he come back to me, we may have closed this gap. He never came back to me. He is responsible, and he can't rid himself of this responsibility. And when we analyze the situation from a distance and on a macro basis, not on a micro basis, No one can put the blame entirely on Israel, but the blame is primarily a Palestinian blame, because he should have come back to me and he should have completed these negotiations.
But maybe also they realized that taking it to their people, it might not have been acceptable. When you consider the Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, in East Jerusalem, in the refugee camps in parts of Europe.
I'm talking about
Sure.
67 borders. Arab side of Jerusalem is in the Palestinian hands. Gaza is in their hands, and also I've proposed, which was part of the plan, a highway that connects Gaza to the West Bank. There never was a highway, never was any geographical connection between Gaza and the West Bank.
And what I'm saying is that was still unacceptable to them, which is part of the issue
How do you know that
here.
it was unacceptable?
They didn't accept it. That's why.
Their leadership.
Their leadership didn't accept it.
Okay.
Their leadership didn't put it to their people.
Did they? Did they? Do you know of any elections in the...
Certainly, that's what I'm saying. So it wasn't put to the Palestinian people,
Okay.
and it wasn't
So
accepted.
this is their responsibilities. I was ready to commit to Israel for it. Palestinians were not. So
And-
they can't put the blame on Israel. You want to say
Right.
that suddenly the Palestinians became a democratically elected government with a very sensitive attention to the public opinion.
All I'm saying is that you offered it and you consider it generous, but the fact that it wasn't accepted means that it was unacceptable
That
to them.
because-
However, it wasn't accepted.
What does it prove? It proves that the Palestinians were not prepared to adjust themselves to the reasonable conditions which are acceptable by everyone
Certainly.
in the world
I
to
don't-
make peace with Israel.
And you say Abbas told you that had you been in power for 4 more months,
He didn't say it to me. He
Oh.
said it in public everywhere he went,
I see.
including on every television networks in the world.
and the implicit notion there being that what came after you, Netanyahu, mostly Netanyahu, Naftali Bennett and others in between a little bit, but mostly Netanyahu, it's been the decade or almost decade and a half of Netanyahu. It's the belief that he would not accept something like this.
He didn't.
And now what we're seeing is when you have Ben Gvir and Smotrich and the like in the cabinet talking of annexation of the West Bank, when you have this absolutist approach from within the Israeli government, isn't there a responsibility then, as egregious and atrocious as those acts were on October the 7th, to take responsibility for the build-up to what we had now recently?
If I may say to you, you are sliding into the common mistake made by those who are anxious to put all the blame on Israel.
Hamas is responsible
hang on.
for its actions. Qassam, Islamic Jihad.
No, yes, but from 2008, if you want, from 2005, Hamas is there to destroy every chance for peace. Let's not forget it. What I think about Ben Gvir and his friends, I've spelled out in Israel, not in Turkey. In Israel, in front of them, in the most extreme manner. I call them enemies. I say that they are butchers, that they are killers, they are murderers, they are terrorists. I said it on my own people, on my own ministers in the Israeli government, so I don't need you to remind me of who they are. Let's put it this way, for the sake of transparency and also for the sake of decency. The main culprit of shaking every chance for peace is Hamas and the lack of leadership amongst the Palestinians.
Why?
Since
Why can't we say
2009, since
certainly.
2009, the Israeli policy was absolutely negative, was not really prepared to embark on a meaningful process that was essential. They have not followed the policy that I've outlined, which carried a real chance for peace, and I don't release the Israeli government from 2009 of its responsibility for the lack of communication. However, none, neither this nor that, can justify the atrocious attacks, the butchering, the killing, the beheading, the raping of the Hamas. This is something that will never be forgotten and never be forgiven. And to the last day of life, we will reach out for these people that committed it, and we will destroy them, because that's what they deserve.
You tried this in 2008, 2009. You waged a war. A lot of people died. Less than now, but a lot of people died. It was appalling. Why couldn't all these things be done then? You failed then. Netanyahu failed in 2014 again. What makes you think this time around Hamas gets eradicated and all these things fall into place?
Number one, I didn't wage war. I reacted to the endless shooting of rockets from Gaza into the Israeli townships across the border.
You were involved in a war, December 2008, January 2009.
Yeah, I know, but I didn't initiate it. I had to respond. This was a counter-offensive against endless shooting of Qassam rockets against Israeli townships in Ashdod, in Sderot, in Ashkelon.
Why wasn't it your goal then to eradicate Hamas? Or did you try and fail?
No.
And why did you fail?
I tried. I could. Unfortunately, because of political constraints, it was at the very end of my tenure as Prime Minister. Actually, at the time that I started this military operation, I already resigned from the Prime Ministership. And the elections were scheduled to be on the 10th of February, and we started the operation on the 27th of December, about a month and a half before the elections. So the flexibility that I had was very limited at that time. And unfortunately, I couldn't complete this operation, although I think at that time there was a very good chance that we could have eradicated it. From then on, it was not me, it was Bibi Netanyahu, and what I think of him, you know, and I think that he's a danger to Israel, that he should be immediately fired, that he should be thrown out, that his bedtime, because of many reasons which have nothing to do with Palestinians, because of us. So I don't need anyone to remind me of how bad Netanyahu is. The only problem is that mostly those who remind me of the Israeli government fail to recognize the corruption, the weakness, the extremity, the fundamentalism, the atrocities which characterize some of the Palestinian organizations, and the failure of the Palestinians to overcome them, and the desire to put the blame for the Palestinian extremity on Israel, which is absolutely untrue.
They are responsible for their actions. At what point is the Israeli leadership, whether you in 2008 and 9, Netanyahu in 2014, Netanyahu now, at what point is the Israeli leadership responsible for, given the knowledge that this is densely populated, half the population are children, at what point is the Israeli leadership responsible for the suffering of those civilians in Gaza, especially as it rains down airstrikes on the people?
Israel fundamentally is not responsible for the fact that Gaza is Gaza and that it is densely populated with children and with elderly people for their lack of natural resources to establish more quality life for the people. First and foremost, this is the responsibility of the Palestinians themselves, that never had within their own midst any democratic government, any desire to set priorities that will take care of the needs of the people at the possible sacrifice of their desire to destroy the state of Israel. Now, could Israel do more over the years in order to, particularly in the last 15 years, since 2009? The answer is yes. And I criticize the Israeli government for that, for the lack of vision, for the lack of a broad mind approach by government of Netanyahu. But they have not, even Netanyahu, as bad as he is, he's the worst for us. He has not created the difficulties in Gaza or in the West Bank. The historical record is different. Could we do more? Yes.
Yeah.
Could he, should he, had he been forced to do a lot more? The answer is absolutely yes. He didn't. That's why I think he has to go.
Again, Hamas responsible for its actions, the Palestinian leadership responsible for their actions. My question to you, the siege of Gaza, the occupation of the West Bank, is that still the right thing to do, given that you've seen the fruits of everything that comes beyond it afterwards? Is it the moral thing to continue doing?
Look, two things are immoral. First and foremost, the hatred, the atrocities, and the continued attempts by the Palestinians to reach out for Israeli civilians everywhere they are and to kill them without any desire to make peace with us. This is one thing which is immoral. The other thing which is immoral is the lack of clear Israeli policy towards the creation of a Palestinian state in negotiations with the Palestinian Authority. And I have outlined these both things. To try and put all the blame on the Israeli side is a mistake that leads nowhere. To ignore the fact that the Palestinian narrative was dominated over the last 15 years by the extremists, by the Islamic Jihad, by the Hamas, and by others, is to make a mistake that will lead us nowhere. The problem is this. Ben Gvir is a terrible event. Smotrich is a terrible event. The Hilltop youth in the territories, in Gaza, in the West Bank, is a terrible event. And I'm fighting them tooth and nail on a daily basis. But they have not butchered babies and beheaded them. This was done by Palestinians, and nothing can clear it, and nothing can remove it from the national awareness of Israelis for generations to come. And yet, today, when you ask me, I keep saying to you, we have to pull out from Gaza after the military operation. We don't have to do anything in controlling of Gaza, and we have to cooperate with other international forces in order to rebuild Gaza for the well-being of its citizens, not its murderers that have to be eradicated. And we have to allow the creation of a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza under the Palestinian Authority on the basis of more or less 67 borders with swaps of territories. I haven't changed my end game scenario, my political vision.
You still believe in two states. A lot of other people don't believe in two states.
They don't believe in anything.
But
that's
they
the
look at
problem.
it and they say, well,
they only believe in the eradication of the state of Israel. You hear the Palestinian speakers speak now. They believe in the eradication of Israel. That will never happen. Forget about it.
Why can't you have a binational state? Equal rights for everybody.
It's the only way for Israelis and Palestinians to live peacefully is to separate. I don't believe in a binational state because you know just as good as I know that a binational state is a prescription for endless terror and killing and confrontations. And that's the last thing that we want.
The current system has been a prescription for endless terror and killings and occupation and siege, and so
because of the lack of desire of the Palestinians to make the last step. And do you think that it will change when there will be a one state? Never. Palestinians will never give up, and for good reasons. Their desire to have their own Palestinian state and to exercise their right of self-determination. That's what I propose to them. I say, hey, you deserve this. It's not something that I owe you. It's something that you owe for yourself and that we have to accept and recognize, because that's how I think basically, fundamentally, we have realized our rights. You have to have your self-determination recognized and implemented in territories where you constitute the majority, regardless of whether historically I think that most of these territories perhaps are more connected to the Jewish history than to anything other than the Jewish history. But if you want to make peace, you have to make concessions, and I'm prepared to make these concessions.
Is Netanyahu prepared to make concessions?
No, that's why he has to go. I don't. Let it be clear. Netanyahu is a national historical disaster for Israel. He has to go. But to say that Netanyahu is responsible for the lack of peace without recognizing the reluctance of the Palestinian leaderships for generations to accommodate into what has been accepted and agreed is to distort their real perspectives.
No,
and I'm not ready to do it.
You made it clear. And it's good to get your thoughts. It's been fascinating, so I thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure.
You.
All the best.
Thank you.